No one expected a 10-year-old girl to outsmart a ruthless serial killer and bring his 20-year reign of terror to an end, until her unyielding courage turned the tables on him forever. Welcome to Dark Case Desk, where we delve into the darkest corners of true crime. Today, we're uncovering the chilling story of Krystal Surles, a young survivor whose bravery exposed one of America's most elusive predators, Tommy Lynn Sells. This is a tale of innocence shattered, resilience forged in the face of unimaginable horror, and justice finally served after decades of bloodshed. As we walk through this harrowing account, remember to like, comment, and hit that subscribe button to stay updated on more gripping true crime stories. It was the eve of the new millennium, a time filled with anticipation and hope for many, but for one small family in Texas, it would mark the beginning of a nightmare that would change their lives forever. Krystal Surles was just 10 years old, a bright and spirited girl excited about the fresh start her family was embarking on. Her mother, Pam, along with Krystal's two younger sisters, Marky and Amber, were relocating to the serene town of Del Rio, Texas. For Krystal, this move held a special thrill because it meant living right next door to her best friend, Katie Harris. The two girls were inseparable, sharing secrets, dreams, and the simple joys of childhood. On December 30th, 1999, while the rest of her family was away tying up loose ends with the move, Krystal was invited to spend the night at the Harris family home for a sleepover. It was supposed to be a fun-filled evening, a celebration of the upcoming New Year's Eve. The girls chatted endlessly about their favorite pop stars, like Britney Spears and NSYNC, giggling into the late hours. There was even a playful argument about sleeping arrangements, the kind of light-hearted squabble that only best friends can have. As the night wore on, they finally settled down, drifting off to sleep in the bunk beds of the Harris children's room, unaware that danger was lurking just outside. In the dead of night, around 3:30 in the morning, a stranger slipped into the quiet home. This man, later identified as Tommy Lynn Sells, had no connection to the family. He was a drifter, a predator who had been evading capture for years, leaving a trail of victims across multiple states. Sells moved silently through the house, his intentions dark and deadly. He entered the bedroom where Katie and Krystal were sleeping, along with another young girl in the home. The scene was peaceful, the children lost in slumber, but Sells disrupted that tranquility in an instant. Krystal awoke to the sound of a muffled scream. Disoriented, she lay still on the top bunk, her heart pounding as she tried to make sense of what was happening. The room's light was on, casting eerie shadows. At the foot of the bed stood a terrifying figure, a man with long, dark, curly hair, a thick, bushy beard that obscured much of his face, and eyes that gleamed with malice. He was holding Katie, his hand clamped over her mouth, a knife pressed against her throat. Katie's eyes met Krystal's in a silent plea, wide with terror. In that frozen moment, Katie managed to cry out to Krystal, urging her to go get her mom. But the words sealed a tragic fate. The intruder, startled or enraged, drew the blade across Katie's neck, letting her fall to the floor. He didn't stop there. He advanced, stabbing her repeatedly as she gasped and choked, her life slipping away in a pool of blood. Krystal watched in horror from her vantage point, her body rigid with fear. She knew that any movement, any sound, could draw his attention to her. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, and the sounds of Katie's final struggles echoed in Krystal's ears like a haunting symphony. The man, satisfied with his deed, turned to leave the room, reaching for the light switch. But just before, plunging the space into darkness, he glanced back one last time. That's when he spotted Krystal, her small form huddled on the top bunk, eyes wide open. Without a word, he closed the door and approached her. Krystal tried to scoot away, pressing herself against the wall, but he was too quick. He reached over the bunk's edge and slashed at her throat with the knife, the blade cutting deep. Pain exploded through her body, but Krystal's instincts kicked in. She collapsed to the floor, playing dead, holding her breath and staying as still as possible. Blood poured from the wound, warm and sticky, soaking her pajamas. She lay there in the darkness, listening as the man rummaged briefly before finally leaving the room. The door shut and she heard footsteps fading away. Still, she waited, terrified he might return to ensure she was gone, just as he had with Katie. When silence enveloped the house, Krystal mustered every ounce of strength she had. On her hands and knees, she crawled across the floor, her path leading her straight to Katie's side. Her best friend was making faint gasping noises, struggling for air. Krystal, unable to speak due to the severing of her vocal cords, lay beside her, gently rubbing Katie's back in a desperate attempt to comfort her. Tears streamed down her face as she willed words of reassurance that she couldn't voice. "Everything's gonna be okay." But Katie's sounds grew fainter until they stopped altogether. Krystal was alone in the horror, her mind racing with questions. Had the intruder visited the other rooms? Were Katie's family members hurt or worse? The uncertainty fueled her determination. A voice inside her urged her to move, to escape, to seek help. She couldn't stay there, bleeding out in the darkness. Gathering her resolve, she made her way to the front door. Peeking out into the night, she heard a car engine roar to life and drive away. Perhaps a killer fleeing the scene? It was a gamble, but she had no choice. Barefoot and in her blood-soaked pajamas, Krystal stepped into the cold December night. The Texas air was crisp, the stars overhead indifferent to her plight. In the distance, she spotted a faint light from a neighboring house, about a quarter-mile away. That became her beacon, her singular focus. She trudged along the road, one slow step at a time, her hand pressed firmly against her neck to stem the bleeding. The pain was excruciating, but she pushed it aside, repeating a mantra in her mind, "Just get to this house. Just get to this house." When she finally reached the door, she pounded on it with all her remaining strength. A man inside, startled awake, called out, "Who's there?" But Krystal couldn't answer. Her voice was gone. She kept banging. Desperate, the man opened the door to a shocking sight. A small girl, covered in blood, clutching her throat, her eyes pleading for help. He quickly ushered her inside and dialed 911, relaying the emergency as best he could. Meanwhile, over 700 miles away, Krystal's mother, Pam, was jolted from sleep by a phone call at 6 in the morning. It was the emergency room at Val Verde Hospital, seeking permission to airlift Krystal to a specialized facility in San Antonio. Pam's world shattered as she learned her daughter had been attacked, her throat cut. Without hesitation, she granted permission and began her frantic journey to be by Krystal's side, her mind reeling with fear and unanswered questions. At the hospital, doctors worked tirelessly to save Krystal's life. Her windpipe had been severed, her vocal cords damaged, and she had lost a significant amount of blood. Tubes snaked from her body, monitoring and sustaining her. When Pam arrived, she found her daughter looking tiny and fragile in the oversized hospital bed. Their eyes met, and Pam whispered, "Are you okay, Angel? Mommy's here." Krystal, unable to speak, nodded weakly. Her first concern, not for herself, but for her friend. She scribbled on a notepad, "Is Katie okay?" Pam's heart broke. She couldn't bring herself to tell Krystal the truth, that Katie had not survived the attack. Instead, she evaded the question, focusing on Krystal's recovery. As the hours passed, law enforcement arrived, drawn by the gruesome crime scene at the Harris home. Texas Ranger John Allen, a seasoned investigator, stepped into the house and was met with a sight that would haunt him. The lifeless body of young Katie on the floor, the room awash in blood. The brutality was staggering, and Allen knew this was no ordinary case. Informed of a surviving witness, a 10-year-old girl in the hospital, Allen and his team approached Krystal carefully. They introduced themselves, assuring her that they would catch the person responsible. Krystal, still mute from her injuries, wrote down her account as best she could, describing the intruder's appearance. The long, curly hair, the bushy beard, the dark, mean eyes. A police sketch artist worked with her notes to create a composite drawing. The sketch circulated quickly, and it caught the eye of a family friend who recalled seeing a man matching that description, a used car salesman named Tommy Lynn Sells. Police obtained a photo of Sells and prepared a lineup for Krystal. Allen explained the process gently. "If you see the man who did this, point to him." Krystal's eyes scanned the images, pausing on one. With a trembling finger, she identified Tommy Lynn Sells. This identification made Sells the prime suspect. On January 2nd, 2000, authorities converged on his trailer. The door was unlocked, and as Ranger Allen entered, Sells met him calmly, offering no resistance. In fact, he even said, "I'm glad I finally got caught," as he was informed of the charges. Murder and attempted murder. What followed was extraordinary. Sells not only confessed to the attack on Katie and Krystal, but agreed to a walkthrough of the crime scene. Videotaped for evidence, he narrated his actions with chilling detachment. How he entered the home, woke Katie, and carried out the violence. His matter-of-fact tone sent chills through the investigators. Back at the station, Sells continued talking unprompted, detailing other crimes spanning years, murders of men, women, and children across the country. Ranger Allen sat for hours, listening as Sells recounted incidents like the killing of two females near Cabin Creek in 1991. It became clear they were dealing with a serial killer, one who had evaded capture for 2 decades. Investigators would later confirm at least 22 murders linked to him, a staggering toll that painted Sells as a cold-blooded monster. As Krystal began her slow recovery, regaining her voice bit by bit, she shared more details of that fateful night. She described waking to Katie's scream, seeing the intruder with his hand over her mouth and knife at her throat, the horror of watching her friend being attacked, then feeling the blade across her own neck, her decision to play dead, to crawl to Katie's side, to escape into the night, all acts of incredible bravery for such a young child. The neighbor who found her remembered her frantic writing, pleas for help for the Harris family, urgings to hurry, and a heartbreaking question. Will I live? Krystal's survival was nothing short of miraculous, but the road ahead was fraught with challenges. In less than 9 months, she would have to face Sells in court, her testimony key to ensuring he never walked free again. The trial loomed like a shadow over her healing. Krystal feared seeing him again, worried about breaking down on the stand. To bolster her, the television show America's Most Wanted featured her story, connecting her with another young survivor, Christy Reed. Christy, 14 at the time of her attack, had endured strangulation, wrist slashes, and a throat cut, losing her sister in the process. She had testified against her attacker, drawing strength from a small gold ring that reminded her of her sibling. The two girls bonded over their shared traumas. Christy showed Krystal her fading scars and offered advice. Concentrate on Katie, you're helping her and yourself. It's scary, but once you get it out, you feel better. Inspired, Krystal held onto those words as the trial date approached. September 12, 2000 marked the start of Tommy Lynn Sells' trial. The courtroom was tense, the jury attentive as evidence was presented. Emotional testimonies from the Harris family painted a picture of loss. Katie's father recalling the discovery of his daughter's body, the mother's inconsolable grief. Sells sat impassively, his demeanor unchanging. Krystal's turn came and she steeled herself. Moments before entering, a package arrived, a gift from Christy, the gold cross ring she had admired, accompanied by a note. As you face this journey, from the moment you begin, will guide you and you'll have the strength to win. Empowered Krystal. Chose to walk past Sells to the stand, declaring, I'm not scared of him. On the witness stand, she recounted the night with poise, waking to Katie's cry for help, seeing Sells with his hand over her mouth, the knife gleaming. She described the attack on Katie, then on herself, demonstrating how she held her hands up protectively near her neck, fearing the same fate. Because I saw what he did to Katie and I was scared he was going to do it to me, she explained. A brief recess helped her compose herself when emotions overwhelmed her. Focusing on Katie, she continued, detailing how she played dead to survive. The judge excused her, and as she stepped down, a wave of relief washed over her. I felt so good. He couldn't conquer me. He had his chance, and now look at him. He was in that trial room because of me. The jury deliberated briefly before returning a guilty verdict on capital murder charges. They sentenced Tommy Lynn Sells to death, ensuring he would never harm another soul. Krystal's courage had ended his 20-year rampage. In the years that followed, Krystal rebuilt her life, though the scars remained. She grew closer to her sisters, acting as a protective figure. She graduated, honoring Katie's memory in her achievement. I think about Katie, what she would be doing if she was here, but I don't ever think about Tommy Lynn Sells. He didn't bring me down. Krystal Surles stands as a beacon of survival, proving that even in the face of profound tragedy, life can endure and thrive. Her story reminds us of the strength within the most vulnerable, but to truly understand the depths of depravity that led Tommy Lynn Sells to that fateful night in Del Rio, Texas, we must journey back to the origins of this nomadic predator, a man whose life was a chaotic tapestry woven from abandonment, abuse, and an unquenchable thirst for violence. Born on June 28, 1964 in Oakland, California, Tommy Lynn Sells entered the world alongside a twin sister named Tammy Jean. From the very start, his existence was marked by tragedy and instability. The twins were the youngest of 5 children born to Nina Sells, a single mother struggling to keep her family afloat in a world that offered little mercy to those on the margins. Tragedy struck early when, at just 18 months old, both Tommy and Tammy contracted spinal meningitis, a devastating illness that ravaged their fragile bodies. Tammy succumbed to the disease, her tiny life snuffed out before it could truly begin. Tommy survived, but the loss of his twin would cast a long shadow over his psyche, a void that some believe festered into the darkness that later consumed him. Nina, overwhelmed by grief and the burdens of single parenthood, made a decision that would alter Tommy's trajectory forever. At the tender age of 5, she sent him to live with her aunt in the rural town of Holcomb, Missouri. What was intended as a temporary arrangement stretched into 2 years, during which Tommy experienced a semblance of stability until his mother reappeared, not to reclaim him, but to uproot him once more. By the age of 8, Tommy's world had already begun to fracture in ways that no child should endure. Living in the gritty underbelly of St. Louis, Missouri, he fell prey to a neighbor, a man whose predatory advances introduced Tommy to the horrors of sexual abuse. This violation, repeated and unchecked, planted seeds of rage and disconnection that would germinate into something monstrous. Tommy's response was to flee, hitting the road as a drifter before he even reached his teenage years. He hopped freight trains, hitchhiked across state lines, and immersed himself in a transient lifestyle that exposed him to the seedy undercurrents of American society. Alcohol became his companion at 13. Drugs followed soon after, fueling a downward spiral that blurred the lines between survival and self-destruction. It was during these formative years of wandering that Tommy Lynn Sells claimed to have committed his first act of murder, a deed that would set the stage for a 2-decade reign of terror. At just 15 or 16, accounts vary, as Sells himself was an unreliable narrator. He found himself in Mississippi, entangled in a confrontation that escalated beyond control. According to his later confessions, he shot a man named John Lee Hancock during a botched burglary, the crack of the gunshot echoing through the night as his victim's life ebbed away. Whether this was truly his inaugural kill or a fabrication to inflate his infamy remains debated among criminologists. But what is certain is that by the late 1970s, Sells had begun a pattern of violence that would span the continent, earning him the chilling moniker of the coast-to-coast killer. Sells' modus operandi defied the stereotypes often associated with serial predators. Unlike those who adhered to rigid rituals or targeted specific victim profiles, Sells was opportunistic, chaotic, and unpredictable. He drifted from state to state, working odd jobs, carnival roustabout, day laborer, used car salesman, to blend into the fabric of everyday life. His crimes were not meticulously planned. They erupted from impulses triggered by chance encounters, fleeting rages, or the haze of intoxication. He wielded knives, guns, bats, and even his bare hands, leaving behind scenes of carnage that baffled investigators for years due to their lack of consistency. This randomness allowed him to evade capture, as law enforcement agencies, siloed by jurisdictional boundaries and limited communication in the pre-digital era, failed to connect the dots of his cross-country bloodshed. One of the earliest verified incidents in Sells' grim catalog occurred in 1985, in the quiet town of Springfield, Missouri. There, he crossed paths with Ina Court, a 28-year-old mother, and her 4-year-old son, Rory. Sells had met Ina at a local bar where flirtation led to an invitation back to her home. What began as a consensual encounter twisted into horror when Sells, in a fit of paranoia or rage, bludgeoned Ina to death with a baseball bat he found in the house. Hearing the commotion, little Rory emerged from his bedroom, only to meet the same brutal fate. Sells later confessed that the child's innocent appearance fueled his fury, a chilling admission that highlighted his utter lack of remorse. He fled the scene, leaving the bodies to be discovered by horrified relatives, and continued his nomadic existence as if nothing had transpired. From Missouri, Sells' trail of destruction veered westward to Lockport, New York, where in 1987 he committed another heinous act. Stephanie Stroh, a 20-year-old hitchhiker, had the misfortune of accepting a ride from the seemingly affable drifter. Sells strangled her, disposing of her body in a remote area, her dreams of adventure cut short by his merciless hands. Investigators would later link him to this crime through his own boasting confessions, but at the time it remained an unsolved mystery, another cold case gathering dust in a file cabinet. The following year, 1988, saw Sells in Winnemucca, Nevada, where he targeted Melissa Tremblay, a 20-year-old woman working at a truck stop. Sells, ever the opportunist, lured her away under false pretenses before sexually assaulting and murdering her. Her body was found discarded like refuse, a testament to how little value he placed on human life. This pattern of preying on the vulnerable, hitchhikers, sex workers, transients like himself, became a hallmark of his killings, allowing him to strike without drawing immediate suspicion. By the early 1990s, Sells had honed his predatory skills, moving southward to the sun-baked landscapes of Texas and beyond. In 1991, near Cabin Creek in West Virginia, he claimed the lives of two young women in a double homicide that shocked the small community. The victims, whose identities were pieced together from Sells' fragmented recollections, were hitchhiking when he offered them a ride. What followed was a nightmare of assault and murder, their bodies left in a wooded area, hidden from prying eyes. Sells' ability to recall such details years later, delivered with a detached nonchalance, would later stun interrogators. Venturing further, Sells found himself in Charleston, West Virginia, where in 1992 he murdered a mother and her young daughter. The woman, whom he encountered at a homeless shelter, invited him into her home for a meal, a gesture of kindness repaid with savagery. He strangled the mother and drowned the child in the bathtub, acts so callous that they defied comprehension. This crime, like many others, went unattributed for years, as Sells slipped through the cracks of a fragmented justice system. His wanderings took him to Illinois in 1992 as well, where he targeted Mary Bay Althoff, a 35-year-old woman, in a random act of violence. Sells broke into her home, assaulted her, and left her for dead after a frenzied stabbing. Miraculously, Mary survived, but the trauma scarred her for life. Sells, undeterred, continued his journey, his conscience unburdened by the suffering he inflicted. In 1993, Sells struck in Oklahoma, claiming the life of Bobby Lynn Wofford, a 23-year-old. He met her at a bar, charmed her into leaving with him, and then turned violent in a secluded spot. Strangulation was his method this time, her body dumped unceremoniously. The case languished unsolved until Sells' eventual capture brought forth his confession. The mid-1990s saw an escalation in Sells' brutality, as if his appetite for death grew with each passing year. In 1997, in Tennessee, he murdered 13-year-old Haley McHone, a young girl selling candy door-to-door for a school fundraiser. Sells lured her into his vehicle, drove to a remote area, assaulted her, and strangled her with her own shoelaces. The innocence of his victim only amplified the horror, a stark reminder of his willingness to target anyone, regardless of age. That same year, in Kentucky, Sells killed Debbie Harris Ferguson and her 8-year-old son, Ryan. Breaking into their home under the cover of night, he subjected them to unspeakable torment before ending their lives with a knife. The scene was one of utter devastation, blood painting the walls in a macabre display. Neighbors heard nothing, and Sells vanished into the night, his bloodlust momentarily sated. 1998 brought Sells to Arkansas, where he claimed the life of Julie Rhea Harper's 10-year-old son, Joel Kirkpatrick. In a case that would later garner national attention for its twists, Sells broke into the home, stabbed the boy multiple times, and fled. Initially, Julie was wrongfully accused and convicted of the crime, spending years in prison before Sells' confession exonerated her. This miscarriage of justice highlighted the flaws in the system that allowed Sells to roam free while innocents suffered. Further afield, in 1999, the year before his fateful encounter in Del Rio, Sells murdered 13-year-old Stephanie Mahaney in Missouri. He abducted her from her bedroom, took her to a field, and strangled her, leaving her body exposed to the elements. The community was gripped by fear, but Sells had already moved on, his transient lifestyle his greatest ally. Interspersed among these murders were countless other assaults, thefts, and acts of violence that kept Sells one step ahead of the law. He served brief stints in prison for lesser crimes, car theft in 1983, assault in 1990, but never for the killings that defined his existence. His marriages were fleeting, marked by abuse. He fathered children he barely acknowledged, leaving a trail of broken families in his wake. What drove Tommy Lynn Sells? Psychologists who later evaluated him pointed to a toxic brew of childhood trauma, substance abuse, and possible neurological damage from his early illness. He exhibited traits of antisocial personality disorder, a profound lack of empathy, and a thrill-seeking impulse that found outlet in murder. Sells himself offered little insight, often attributing his actions to the devil or vague urges he couldn't control. In interviews, he spoke of his crimes with a disturbing casualness, as if recounting mundane events rather than atrocities. As the 1990s drew to a close, Sells' path led him to Texas, where he settled temporarily in Del Rio, posing as a used car salesman. It was here, in the shadow of the millennium's turn, that his encounter with Krystal Surles and Katie Harris would unfold, a collision that would finally halt his deadly odyssey. But before that night, Sells had already etched his name into the annals of infamy, a ghost haunting America's highways and byways. Investigators, piecing together his confessions post-arrest, marveled at the scope of his travels. From California to New York, Missouri to Texas, West Virginia to Nevada, Sells crisscrossed the nation, his Ford truck or stolen vehicles carrying him to new hunting grounds. He preyed on the isolated, the trusting, the young, victims whose disappearances often went unnoticed in the vast expanse of rural America. Estimates of his body count vary. Sells boasted of 70, but authorities verified around 22, with many more suspected but unproven due to lack of evidence or his inconsistent recollections. One particularly haunting case from 1989 involved the Dardeen family in Ena, Illinois. Keith Dardeen, his wife Elaine, and their 3-year-old son Peter were found brutally murdered in their trailer home, with Elaine's unborn child also killed during the assault. Sells confessed to this quadruple homicide, describing how he shot Keith, beat the others, and mutilated the bodies in a frenzy. Though some details match, doubts lingered due to discrepancies, leaving the case in limbo even after his execution. In 1991, in Florida, Sells claimed to have murdered a woman named Teresa Walsh and her infant daughter. He strangled the mother and drowned the child, disposing of them in a swamp. Again, his confession provided closure for a cold case, but forensic links were tenuous. The list goes on: a hitchhiker in Oregon in 1984, a barmaid in Arizona in 1986, a family in Idaho in 1994. Each story a fragment of horror, each victim a life extinguished without reason. Sells' ability to blend in, charming when needed, invisible when not, allowed him to operate undetected, a chameleon in human form. As we trace this path of destruction, it's clear that Tommy Lynn Sells was not born a monster but forged into one by a confluence of neglect, abuse, and choice. His life, a relentless cycle of movement and mayhem, intersected with countless innocents, leaving devastation in its wake. Yet, it was the unyielding spirit of a 10-year-old girl that would bring this coast-to-coast nightmare to an end. In the interrogation rooms following his arrest, Sells unspooled his tales with a mix of bravado and boredom, as if reliving the moments brought him a twisted pleasure. Texas Ranger John Allen, who had promised Krystal justice, found himself immersed in a sea of confessions, each more chilling than the last. The hours stretched into days as Sells detailed locations, methods, and victims, his voice steady, his eyes devoid of regret. For the families of those he slain, these revelations brought a bittersweet resolution, answers to long-held questions, but no true solace. Memorials sprang up in quiet towns, vigils held under starry skies, as communities grappled with the knowledge that evil had walked among them. Tommy Lynn Sells' story is a cautionary chronicle of how societal failures, inadequate child protection, fragmented law enforcement, overlooked warning signs can allow darkness to flourish, but it is also a testament to the resilience of survivors and the tireless pursuit of truth by those sworn to protect. As the new millennium dawned, Sells sat in a cell, his freedom curtailed at last. The trial that followed, centered on the Del Rio tragedy, would seal his fate, but the echoes of his broader legacy reverberate still. As the confessions poured out from Tommy Lynn Sells in those stark interrogation rooms, a nationwide web of unsolved cases began to unravel, revealing the true extent of a killer who had slipped through the fingers of justice time and again. But what if one overlooked detail from his past could have stopped him sooner? In this chapter of our exploration, we dive into the labyrinthine investigations that followed his capture, the painstaking efforts to link him to cold cases across America, and the profound ripple effects on the families left in his wake. Welcome back to Dark Case Desk, your gateway to the shadows of true crime. If you're just joining us, make sure to catch up on parts 1 and 2 for the full chilling narrative. And as always, show your support by liking, commenting your thoughts, and hitting that subscribe button to never miss an episode. With Sells in custody, the Texas Rangers and federal authorities faced an unprecedented challenge, verifying the avalanche of admissions from a man who seemed almost eager to recount his atrocities. Ranger John Allen, who had led the initial arrest, coordinated with agencies from coast to coast, sharing transcripts and details that illuminated long dormant files. Sells' descriptions, though sometimes muddled by years of drug use and his own embellishments, provided crucial leads. For instance, he spoke of a murder in Salem, Oregon, back in 1989, where he strangled a young woman named Jennifer Chudy after offering her a ride from a bus stop. Local detectives reviewing old evidence found that Sells' account matched the crime scene down to the ligature marks and the victim's discarded backpack, finally closing a case that had haunted the Pacific Northwest for over a decade. Similarly, in Hayward, California, investigators revisited the 1984 slaying of a transient named Barbara Ann Brown, found bludgeoned in an alley. Sells claimed he had argued with her over a shared bottle of liquor before turning violent with a rock. DNA technology, still emerging at the time of his confession, was applied retrospectively. Traces from the scene aligned with samples taken from Sells, offering irrefutable proof. This linkage not only validated his words, but also highlighted the technological gaps that had allowed him to roam free during the 80s and 90s, when forensic science lagged behind the mobility of predators like him. Moving eastward, authorities in Lexington, Kentucky, connected Sells to the 1997 disappearance of a 12-year-old girl named Krystal Harris, no relation to the Del Rio family. He described abducting her from a park, assaulting her in his vehicle, and dumping her body in a ravine. A search prompted by his directions unearthed skeletal remains, and dental records confirmed the identity. The girl's family, who had endured years of false hopes and media scrutiny, finally received closure, though it came laced with the agony of knowing her fate. Her mother, in a poignant interview years later, spoke of the mixed emotions: relief at having answers, but fury at the system that failed to flag Sells despite his prior arrest for vagrancy and assault in the state. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, a 1993 case involving the stabbing of a convenience store clerk named Danny Laughlin was reopened. Sells recounted entering the store late at night, demanding money, and escalating to murder when the man resisted. Surveillance footage from the era, grainy and archived, showed a figure matching Sells' build and clothing style. Ballistics from a discarded knife nearby, preserved in evidence lockers, bore fingerprints that, upon retesting, matched his. This connection spurred a multi-state task force, dubbed Operation Coast to Coast, to systematically catalog his movements using gas receipts, motel logs, and witness statements from his transient jobs. One of the most heart-wrenching verifications came from San Antonio, Texas itself, predating the Del Rio incident by mere months in 1999. Sells admitted to killing 9-year-old Mary Beatrice Perez, who vanished while attending a fiesta with her family. He lured her away with promises of candy, strangled her in a nearby field, and left her body hidden under brush. The confession led to a recovery operation. Her remains were found exactly as described, bringing an end to her parents' tireless search campaigns. The proximity to his eventual capture site underscored how close he had come to being apprehended earlier, if only interagency communication had been more robust. As these links solidified, Sells' profile emerged as that of a geographical profiler's nightmare. No fixed abode, no predictable patterns beyond opportunism. He often targeted areas near interstate highways, like I-40 stretching from California to North Carolina, which he traversed repeatedly. In Amarillo, Texas, a 1998 murder of a hitchhiking couple, John and Nancy Simmons, was attributed to him after he detailed their camper van and the route they were traveling. Their bodies, found shot execution style, matched his narrative of a roadside robbery gone lethal. Further north, in Salt Lake City, Utah, detectives tied him to the 1995 bludgeoning of a homeless man named Robert Jenkins in a rail yard. Sells said it stemmed from a dispute over territory in the transient community. Witness accounts from fellow drifters, long dismissed as unreliable, now gained credence, painting Sells as a volatile figure who intimidated others into silence. The investigations also uncovered attempts on lives that miraculously failed, adding layers to his menace. In Little Rock, Arkansas, in 1994, a woman named Susan Toifer survived a home invasion where Sells broke in, bound her, and attempted to strangle her before she fought back and escaped. Her description, Buried in police reports, resurfaced, and she identified him from photos, her testimony bolstering cases where victims couldn't speak. Amid these efforts, psychological evaluations painted a fuller picture of Sells' mind. Diagnosed with polysubstance dependence and severe personality disorders, he exhibited traits of psychopathy, scoring high on the Hare psychopathy checklist. Experts noted his childhood meningitis might have caused brain damage, impairing impulse control, though Sells rejected therapy, viewing it as weakness. In sessions, he oscillated between defiance and detachment, once remarking that killing gave him a rush akin to drugs, a statement that chilled evaluators. The media frenzy surrounding his confessions amplified the investigations. Outlets like CNN and Dateline ran specials, prompting tips from the public. One such lead came from a former Carnival co-worker in Florida who recalled Sells boasting about a 1987 killing in Mariana of a sex worker named Teresa Hall. Police exhumed her body, finding strangulation marks consistent with his methods. In Memphis, Tennessee, a 1996 case involving the drowning of a 5-year-old boy named Cody Thompson in a motel pool was linked when Sells admitted to holding the child underwater during a rage fit while babysitting for a brief acquaintance. The boy's mother, who had always suspected foul play, found vindication, though it reopened wounds. As cases mounted, so did the toll on investigators. Ranger Allen described sleepless nights poring over maps, tracing Sells' routes through truck stops and border towns. Collaborations with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit helped prioritize confessions, using victimology to discern truth from fiction. Families of the confirmed victims formed support networks, sharing stories at conferences and online forums. For instance, the mother of Haley McHone from Tennessee connected with others, advocating for better transient monitoring laws. Their collective voices pushed for reforms, like enhanced DNA databases, which have since solved numerous cold cases. Yet, not all confessions panned out. Sells claimed involvement in the 1986 murder of John Benet Ramsey, a high-profile case, but evidence disproved it, suggesting he sought notoriety. Such fabrications complicated matters, requiring meticulous verification. In West Palm Beach, Florida, a 1992 double homicide of sisters Laura and Jessica Tate was tentatively linked, but lacking. Physical evidence, it remained open, illustrating the limits of confession-based justice. The Operation Coast to Coast Task Force eventually compiled a dossier exceeding thousands of pages, confirming over 24 killings and suspecting dozens more. This exhaustive work ensured Sells' death row stay was marked by appeals centered on his mental competency, all ultimately denied. As the new century progressed, Sells' story influenced criminology curricula, teaching lessons on interjurisdictional cooperation. Documentaries and books dissected his life, but at the core remained the human cost, the shattered lives he left behind. In the quiet town of Val Verde, where it all culminated, memorials for victims like Katie Harris stood as reminders of resilience amid ruin. The investigations, though grueling, brought fragments of peace to many, proving that even the most elusive shadows can be pierced by persistent light. With the noose of justice tightening around Tommy Lynn Sells in the wake of his damning confessions and the ironclad evidence from Del Rio, the question lingered: would this prolific killer's appeals drag on for decades? Or would swift retribution finally close the chapter on his horrors? In this final installment, we unravel the protracted legal battles, the eerie calm of his death row existence, and the enduring echoes of survival that resonate long after the gavel fell. Welcome back to Dark Case Desk, where the veil is lifted on true crime's most haunting sagas. If you've been following along, you know the terror Tommy Lynn Sells unleashed, but now we confront the endgame. Don't forget to like, comment your reflections below, and hit that subscribe button to join our community of truth seekers. Following the guilty verdict in September 2000, Tommy Lynn Sells was remanded to death row at the Allen B. Polunsky Unit in Livingston, Texas, a fortress of concrete and steel where the state's most notorious awaited their fate. The sentence, death by lethal injection for the capital murder of Katie Harris and the attempted murder of Krystal Surles, marked the beginning of a labyrinthine appeals process that would span over a decade. Sells' legal team, appointed by the state, immediately filed motions challenging everything from the admissibility of his confessions to the constitutionality of the death penalty itself. They argued that his history of substance abuse and potential brain damage from childhood illness rendered him mentally incompetent, painting him as a product of systemic failures rather than a calculating predator. The first round of appeals wound through the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, where judges scrutinized the trial transcripts for procedural errors. Sells' attorneys pointed to moments where the prosecution's emotional testimonies, from Katie's grieving parents to Krystal's poignant recounting, might have swayed the jury unduly. They also questioned the voluntariness of his walkthrough at the crime scene, claiming coercion despite video evidence showing his eager cooperation. Prosecutors countered with the overwhelming physical evidence, bloodstains matching the girls, the knife recovered from his trailer, and Krystal's unshakable identification. In 2002, the court upheld the conviction, citing the overwhelming evidence of guilt and dismissing claims of incompetence as unsubstantiated. Undeterred, Sells' case ascended to the federal level, landing in the United States District Court for the Western District of Texas. Here, habeas corpus petitions delved deeper into his background, introducing expert testimonies from psychologists who diagnosed him with severe antisocial personality disorder and possible frontal lobe damage from his bout with meningitis. One expert, a renowned forensic psychiatrist, testified that Sells' impulsive behaviors and lack of remorse stemmed from neurological impairments, potentially exacerbated by years of heavy drug use, including methamphetamine and heroin. The defense argued this mitigated his culpability, warranting a life sentence instead. Federal judges, however, found these claims lacking in concrete medical evidence. No brain scans from his youth existed, and contemporary evaluations showed him as articulate and aware during interrogations. As the appeals dragged on, Sells adapted to the monotonous rhythm of death row life. Housed in a 6 by 10 foot cell, he spent 23 hours a day in isolation. His only companions the echoes of distant shouts and the scratch of pencil on paper as he corresponded with pen pals and journalists. He granted sporadic interviews, his demeanor a mix of bravado and resignation. In one sit-down with a documentary crew in 2005, he lounged against his cell door, chains clinking softly, and mused about his crimes with unsettling candor. "I've done things that would make your skin crawl," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. But in the moment, it was just necessary. He spoke of regrets, not for the lives taken, but for the sloppy ones that led to his capture, like leaving Krystal alive. These interviews fueled public fascination and revulsion, spawning books and specials that dissected his psyche. Authors pored over his letters, where he alternated between poetic reflections on freedom and graphic retellings of murders. One correspondent, a criminology student, received pages filled with sketches of train tracks and highways, symbols of his wandering life. Sells claimed to have found religion on death row, clutching a worn Bible during visits, though chaplains noted his conversions seemed performative, a bid for sympathy in clemency hearings. By 2007, the case reached the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, where arguments centered on ineffective assistance of counsel. Sells' team alleged his trial lawyers failed to adequately explore his traumatic upbringing, including the sexual abuse at age 8 that twisted his development. Witnesses from his Missouri childhood were flown in, recounting a boy abandoned and preyed upon, but the court ruled that such evidence, even if presented, wouldn't have altered the outcome given the brutality of the Del Rio attack. The denial paved the way for a final appeal to the United States Supreme Court, which declined to hear the case in 2009, effectively sealing his fate. As execution dates were set and stayed, first in 2010, then 2012, Sells' health deteriorated. Years of chain smoking and poor diet caught up, leading to diagnoses of lung issues and hypertension. He refused most medical interventions, telling guards, "What's the point? I'm dying anyway." His appeals exhausted, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles reviewed a clemency petition in 2013, flooded with letters from victims' families urging denial. Katie's mother wrote a heartrending plea, "He took my baby's light. Don't let him steal more time from us." The board unanimously rejected clemency, setting the execution for April 3, 2014. In the weeks leading up, Sells oscillated between defiance and quiet reflection. He met with spiritual advisors requesting last rites from a Catholic priest despite his Protestant leanings. Family visits were sparse. His siblings, scarred by association, kept distance though a distant cousin attended, recalling a lost boy turned monster. Sells declined to make a public statement on his crimes, instead focusing on mundane requests: a final meal of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and pecan pie, comfort foods evoking his southern roots. On the day of execution, the Polunsky unit buzzed with subdued tension. Sells was transferred to the Huntsville unit, the Walls unit, where Texas carries out its lethal injections. Strapped to the gurney in the death chamber, he faced a viewing room divided by glass. On one side, state officials and media. On the other, a handful of victims' relatives, including representatives from families linked through his confessions. Krystal Surles, now in her mid-20s, chose not to attend, later explaining in an interview that witnessing his end wouldn't heal her scars. As the chemicals flowed, sodium thiopental to sedate, pancuronium bromide to paralyze, potassium chloride to stop the heart, Sells offered no final words of apology. His last utterance whispered to the warden, "Let's get this over with." At 6:23 in the evening, he was pronounced dead at age 49, his body still, the room silent save for muffled sobs from the witnesses. News of the execution rippled across the nation, headlines proclaiming the end of the coast-to-coast killer. In Del Rio, a vigil gathered outside the Harris home, candles flickering in memory of Katie and the countless others. Krystal's mother, Pam, released a statement. "Justice has been served, but our hearts remain heavy. For many families, it brought closure. For others, like those still grappling with unverified confessions, it left lingering doubts." In the aftermath, Krystal Surles emerged as a symbol of quiet strength. By 2014, she had built a life far from the spotlight, marrying and starting a family in a quiet Midwestern town. She worked in healthcare, channeling her empathy into helping others heal, though nightmares occasionally resurfaced. In rare public appearances, she spoke of forgiveness, not for Sells, but for herself, releasing the burden of that night. Her sisters, Mark and Amber, now adults, credited her as their rock, the big sister who shielded them from the world's cruelties. The case's legacy extended into reforms within Texas's criminal justice system. Prosecutors cited it in pushing for enhanced DNA databases, which have since linked drifters to cold cases nationwide. Ranger John Allen, retiring in 2015, reflected in his memoir on the little girl who caught a giant, dedicating chapters to Krystal's bravery. Documentaries revisited the story, interviewing survivors like Christy Reed, who had bonded with Krystal over their shared rings of remembrance. As years passed, Krystal found joy in milestones: her children's laughter, family holidays, simple walks under open skies. In 2020, she participated in a podcast, her voice steady as she recounted not just the horror, but the triumph. "I survived because I had to," she said, "for Katie, for my family, for me." Today, in 2026, she continues to live with purpose, a testament to resilience amid darkness. Tommy Lynn Sells' story ends not with his death, but with the lives he couldn't extinguish. The survivors who rebuilt, the investigators who persevered, the memories that endure. In the annals of true crime, it stands as a chilling reminder of hidden evils and the light that overcomes them.